plays, and all of them very successful. But even back then, I mean, when I was running through some files and also some previous interviews that you gave, you said that even back then, you weren't that much interested in theatre or inspired by theatre. Films would be the stuff that you were interested in, then films actually inspired you in your writing. Why was that?
I guess I just had a love of movies from like a very young age, from like 10 or 11. I think we got our first video recorder when I was like 11 or 12, and just started seeing like 10 movies a week, you know, and very quickly kind of discovered the greats, you know, the modern day greats like Scorsese and Terrence Malick and people like that. And then got into, you know, world cinema and Kurosawa and, you know, all of the world greats in a very short period of time. So I always had that love and tried to write screenplays, but they were very bad, and tried to write radio plays and they weren't much better. But then when I started writing plays after maybe 7 or 8 years of trying these other things, I think something clicked, something worked. Partly practice maybe, but partly the disdain I had for theatre, again, freed something. But I also wanted to make the plays as cinematic as possible for lots of story elements to be happening on stage, as opposed to speaking about them off stage. So that's why I guess there's sort of lots of violence and exploding animals in a lot of my plays, as there are in the films. But somehow I think that's what tapped into that's why they became successful. I think it felt like there was a freshness to the theatre work I was doing. So I did that for about 10 years, but always kind of knowing that films were my first love, and always being scared of the possibility of making one, but knowing that I had to try it at least once. So that's when I made the 6-shooter, the short movie, and it was scary and it's kind of terrifying. But I guess with each one you make, you kind of learn what you don't know, I think. And sometimes it's only by doing it that you can discover how to do it, you know. So In Bruges was the second one, the first feature. But I guess I learned enough I'd learned from my mistakes on the short to hopefully not repeat them on the second. But it was definitely working with Brendan Gleeson and Colin Farrell on that movie that they kind of guided me through it. They protected me from the money people, and which you always need, and they just kind of reassured me that I was on the right track.
Can you tell us a little bit, since you just talked about 6-shooter, your Oscar-winning Best Short Film, can you tell us a little bit how you transitioned into filmmaking? Because again, from previous interviews, I don't know whether they misquoted you or anything, you did say that, well, you didn't know a thing about filmmaking going into the production of 6-shooter. So how did that production come about, and how did you manage to pull it off?
I guess I read some books. Again, Brendan was the lead actor in that, and he definitely helped me through that. But like on day one, and I storyboarded the whole thing. I've done that on all of the films, and I think that's a great tool if there's any young filmmakers out here. I think it really, really helps. My scripts aren't usually image-based. They're usually, you know, about the dialogue and what happens, but there's not a lot of pictures or images in the script itself. So I always find that storyboarding is it's almost like a rewrite, but in pictures. So I guess I had that for the short film, and I think when you have that, it kind of helps guide you through it. Sometimes you don't realize one of the most important things of making a film is how much time you should spend on certain things. But again, that's only something that you realize from doing it once or twice, and seeing what you've got in the edit and what you would have liked to have had in the edit. But it was a terrifying experience, the short. But I guess I learned enough from it to not be quite as scared for the feature. But I'd say it's only after making the fourth one in Inisherin that I actually felt comfortable going to work on a film set. Yeah, it took a while.
Dare I say, I mean, six-shooter, it's quite audacious, quite bold in a way, because before six-shooter, you were very successful in theatre with the two trilogies, with the plays. Probably the logical next step, I mean, would be to remake these plays into films. But you decided not to do that. You started afresh with a new story, completely unrelated to the stuff that you were doing in theatre. So you never really crossed your mind to repeat the plays, I mean, and to...
Not really. I guess my knowledge of plays that had been made into films, there aren't a lot of really good ones. I could count the number on the fingers of Brendan's hand from Inisherin, and there are none. Or maybe there's like 3. We'll have a quiz later to see what they are. But so I didn't want to almost ruin the good parts of the plays by making them into films. But I also sort of wanted to dare myself to come up with something new and something that was purely cinematic, I guess. And luckily I've sort of stuck to that for a while. And haven't run out of stories yet. But just thinking about what you bring to a movie set, I think I didn't realise how much I'd learned in the rehearsal rooms of the plays. I'd never directed any of my plays, partly because, especially in the UK and Ireland, the playwright has the most power. More than the director, in fact. You know, they can't change a line. You pick the director, and you pick the actors with the director. But also, like, every day you're talking to actors and working out what they need. So I think one of the good things about making six-shooter and making, you know, the early films was realizing that I had a tool that I didn't know I had. I like actors, and I like talking about character with them and finding out what they need from me. You know, I'm still sort of scared about a lot of the whole process, but I think the one thing I always bring into each film is a love of actors and acting, and I hope that always sort of shows that it's not just about the visuals. It's the heart of, I think, every good movie is the actors.
And you do keep a very tight coterie of actors around you. I mean, your repertory, your Colin Farrell, Brandon, of course, and for Kerry Condon, and for the Banshees, you have David Pierce, who came back from Six-Shooter.
Yeah. David was the little guy who stabs, I don't know if you've seen Six-Shooter, he stabs the cow in Six-Shooter. He stabbed it so well that I knew I wanted to bring him back. So he became the priest in Inisherin. But also the guy who played the policeman in Six-Shooter is the policeman Gary Lighton is the policeman in Banshees. But Sam Rockwell, I've worked with a couple of times, and on a play. And in the play was also Christopher Walken, who was also in Seven Psychopaths with him. And I kind of think my next project will be with those two. So it's partly about working with the best actors around, and it's partly laziness on my part again. That, you know, I don't like calling up new people and having to, you know, take them out to dinner, and, you know, I just go straight to it.
So it's probably out of laziness that you work with the same editor and the same DP.
Yeah, that's exactly.
That's joking. Actually, well, you've worked with Ben Davis and John Gregory for 2 or 3 films, or
yes.
maybe even further back, right?
Yeah.
I mean, how did you actually work with them? Because as you said, well, working with actors probably is it wouldn't be a problem for you. I mean, when you transition from the stage to films, because you've been working with actors, but in cinema, well, cinematography and the art of editing probably isn't something which might have concerned you when you were working on the stage. So, did they help you, or how did you actually work with them in terms of bringing your vision to fruition?
Mostly, I think it's about preparation. You know, especially with a DP, it's about talking through your references, watching the films that inspired you and inspired this particular story, but just time. So on Banshees of Inisherin, that was my third film with Ben Davis. We actually took a little house in Galway a year before we started shooting, and just talked. I'd already done the storyboards there, so just talked about the storyboards, talked about every single scene. And the first AD was there, first assistant director, and the designer was there too. So like even a year before we started shooting, we kind of knew what the shots would be and where the locations would be. And it's time that it's free, you know. It's again, if there's young filmmakers out there, as much kind of preparation time before the project starts is the most invaluable thing. But it also, you know, on the day, it means you're not scared because these are all friends, old collaborators, and that's partly one of the reasons of working with a lot of the same actors. Is that you're all on the same page from last time, and it also means that, like, for instance, on Inisherin, a lot of the smaller parts were actors who I'd worked with 20 years before, like David and Gary. Kerry was in one of my plays 20 years beforehand. But it also means, like, the film stars are working with people who they completely respect, you know. So Colin and Brendan would know David and know Gary, and maybe would have worked with them 20 years ago. So there's no sort of hierarchy on a film set of mine. It's not about the movie star and the subsidiary characters. It's kind of like a play. Everyone's in it together.
But when you work with actors, how much leeway do you allow them in terms of the delivery? Would it be like you have to deliver this word just like that, nothing else? I mean, or some other more democratic approach?
It's not very democratic, if I'm being honest. No, it is in terms of delivery. It's not in terms of words. Like, they always have to say exactly every single word and every comma and full stop that's on the page. I'm a bit of a stickler or a dictator about that sort of stuff. But I think within that, same as with a stage play, there is so much nuance and differentiation from a line. It's like playing in a classical concert. You know, there's even though the notes are the same, the way you play it can be infinite, I think. So I don't think any of the actors I've worked with would say that was restrictive. In fact, I think it's kind of freeing to know that they're not going to be making anything up the morning they come in, but there's going to be many, many different ways to say a line.
Well, as a writer, the screenwriter, probably as you said, well, the exact words, they must be delivered by the actors, but when you actually wrote the screenplays, to find the right word, that must be some kind of a challenge. Actually, it's quite clear, even in the films, you did bring about this challenge of finding the right word. For example, for 3 Billboards, I remember the scene when Mildred and Dixon, they were talking about, well, Mildred saying, well, or that, sorry for that, I mean, nigger torturing, and then Dixon was saying, no, it's person of color torturing, and they were sort of having this conversation about whether we should use the N-word or person of color, and also in your other films as well. For example, in Bruges, I mean, this dialogue between Colin Farrell and Clémence Boissy, I mean, is it a pastiche? Is it an homage?
A nod of the head.
Yeah. Whether it's alcoves or nooks and crannies, or maybe in Seven Psychopaths, well, when Christopher Walken's character, Hans, said that, well, he kept on using the word bastard. Sorry about that. And then actually, well, his wife said, "Oh well, darling, don't say that word." And he said, "Oh, it's just a word." So probably this struggle for the right word is something that you are very much discerning about.
I think so, yeah, but hopefully in a sort of fun way. Like when I get to those segments in a script, I kind of like having fun with, you know, I'll try to think, is it homage, is it nod of the head, and then let the characters have that same discussion. So a lot of it is about fun. I think the Persons of Colour torturing was a little bit more loaded in terms of, it's more a discussion about political correctness, and that, you know, the cop was so caught up in saying the right word, he was ignoring the actual thing he was doing, the torturing. So I just find it interesting, but mostly I find it fun. There's probably not anything more intelligent I could say about that. It's fun.
Okay, so speaking of nod of the head, maybe allow me to go into something which is less intellectual and more visceral. I mean, we talked about nod of the head. About the head, I mean, a lot of the films, they involve heads or the blowing up of heads, beheading. In Six Shooter, you've got the, should I spoil this for the audience? Or maybe, but there are a lot of heads being blown in some of your films.
Oh, yeah.
And also beheading in the face.
Yeah.
And about, well, cutting off of fingers. So there's a lot of mutilation of the physical body going on. I mean, there does
seem to be a lot of that stuff. I should really go to a psychiatrist and find out what that's all about, but where's the fun in that? So, yeah, I don't know where that comes from. Like, I'm a really happy person, yeah, it surprises me sometimes that these things happen I've got to do a rom-com one of these days, right?
But with somebody's head.
Yeah. Hopefully his.
Well, that'd be great, because actually in Seven Psychopaths, there's this big, I think it's Hans, right? I mean, Christopher Walken's character, he was telling the Martin in the film, Colin Farrell, saying, well, why did your female characters keep on dying? Or maybe, well, they just appear and they either got stabbed or they got killed within 5 seconds, and then women could be killed, but animals couldn't. So actually, well, is it something that is on your mind? I mean, in terms of, well, writing of male and female characters?
Yes. I mean, I think that was partly sort of a joke at the expense of the producers, who, I think in the original version of the script, the dog died at the end, and they said we really would prefer it if that didn't happen, but there was never a mention about any of the violence towards people, and definitely not against women in the script. So then I added that line to kind of poke fun at those producers, it's something I just find sort of interesting to play with and to discuss. You know, as I think most of my work is sort of anti-violence, weirdly. There's just like a lot of violence in them. But I don't think that's necessarily contradictory. You know, I think Sam Peckinpah, who was a big sort of hero of mine, made very violent films, but I always take an anti-violence message, or an anti-male message from most of his films. And I guess that's sort of what I'm trying to tap into a little bit.
Yeah, because actually your films, well, in a way they are about toxic masculinity, dare I say, and also, but it's also about tenderness between men as well. I mean, male bonding, you know, so there's this tuggle between these two very different aspects of masculinity.
Yeah, definitely in Banshees there's those things. I think with Banshees it was almost as much about describing any kind of sad breakup, you know. It just happened to be a platonic one between these guys. But yeah, I guess to be as honest as you can about men and the way you see them, it is something I definitely like to explore as much as possible.
Actually, Martin, since it's a masterclass, so maybe can I ask you about your modus operandi in terms of writing screenplays? Because I recall reading somewhere that when you write your screenplays, it's not like you have a definite structure from the very beginning, as if you have index cards of like how this character would be go to A, from A to B to C to D. That's not how you work, right? I mean, you write and you are constantly even surprised by the characters themselves, isn't it?
Yeah, completely. I never write a treatment, so I never know what's going to happen even 5 pages away from where I am. I think as you write, as you get to the middle, things should start to become clearer about what's going to happen towards the end. But I find it much more exciting and much more fresh to sort of not know what's going to happen. So with Inisherin, I remember all I had was this break, and I didn't think you could get a whole film out of that simple sort of idea. But as soon as Brendan's character on the page came into the pub and made the threat about the fingers, I didn't know he was going to say that until he said it, that he was going to start chopping his fingers off. But once he said it, so I was shocked. And I think when you shock yourself, hopefully an audience member will be in the same place. Similarly with 3 Billboards, when Woody's character, Woody Harrelson, kills himself, I didn't know that was going to happen. You know, I assumed he's a big movie star, he would be there at the end. But again, when you don't know something like that is going to happen, I think that allows twists and turns to happen, which wouldn't have been there if I planned the story out, or the surprise of it wouldn't be there, I think. So, not that I'm saying you shouldn't ever do a treatment. I know certain writers, and it helps. Just personally, I would get bored.
So you never had a treatment before you started the screenplay, but would you have, for example, an idea or maybe even a